Welcome everyone to Records and Information Management 101. My name is Maren Peterson. I've been a RIM specialist at the archives for a few years now. So I've given this training before and I'm excited to do it again. So today we're going to cover the basics you need to know to be compliant with the state of Utah's minimum records management standards. We're going to go through 4 units today. We will define records management, then we will explain how to identify and inventory your records, then discuss how you know how long to keep your records and ensure you are in compliance with legal records retention periods, and share resources you can use in your records management efforts. So Unit 1, every industry, including government, practices some form of records management. So there are a lot of ways that records management can be defined. This definition up top is from ARMA, which is the American Records Management Association. And it says the fields of management responsible for establishing and implementing policies, systems, and procedures to capture, create, access, distribute, use, store, secure, retrieve records, and ensure proper disposition at the conclusion of organization's records and information lifecycle. So, in short, records management is the way in which you keep your records usable and safe, and the processes you put in place to ensure that you can find what you need when you need it and get rid of it properly when you no longer have a use for it. So what does no RIM look like? We're probably all familiar with some form of what that looks like. It can look like a stack of disorganized papers, or it can also look like an email inbox that has 700 unread emails in it. When you have no RIM, it takes a long time to dig through and find what records you need, and it can be daunting to sort through and get rid of what you don't need. And you may often find yourself giving up, maybe even just redoing work because it's easier than finding the original record. No records management might be due to no roles or assignments made to oversee records organization, no training or education about records management. Maybe there's no policies in place about records or data, or maybe there's no organizational structure for paper or electronic records, or no established processes for taking care of records and information. RIM at a basic level is a lot like this picture. Think of papers in a filing cabinet. RIM at a basic level means that you've identified and organized most of your records into groups, and you have a good idea of how long to keep it based on how long you use the records. Basic records management could include having a dedicated place for record storage, providing occasional training to staff on how to use your record storage or where to put records once they gather or create something, and you might have even assigned someone to oversee these processes. So think about times that you might have initiated a records cleanup project or taken the time to account for what records might be stored in boxes in your closet or your basement. If you've done that, you've done some basic RIM. Okay. So in Utah, basic compliance with records, government records and information standards means assigning someone or even multiple people to oversee the records in your organization. We do this by designating records officers, called AROs or appointed records officers, and by identifying which of your organization's administrators will oversee the work of those AROs. And that person is called the Chief Administrative Officer, or CAO for short. So appointed records officers may be responsible for overseeing records management of a department, or they may only be responsible for responding to grandma requests, or they might do both. Anyone appointed to this role is required to report this role to the state archives and certify annually. You can certify on our website. It is also important to ensure that your government also identifies the chief administrative officer who will oversee your records program and report their role to state archives too, because this person will officially appoint new records officers and will be asked to respond to grandma appeals. RIM at an intermediate level includes establishing and implementing more formal rules and procedures around records making and storage process. This might look like creating a formal procedure that establishes an organization method for a storage room, or rules for naming files in a shared file drive. At this level, you might conduct a more detailed inventory of the records you create and determine how long they need to be kept. Perhaps paying particular attention to identifying your most critical records, the ones that you need to keep your division functioning. At this level, you're dedicating more time and resources to records management, but you might not have a dedicated budget or tools that ensure routine compliance. So you may only be checking in on things as time and resources allow. Okay, RIM at an advanced level often requires an investment of your government's time and resources. So those investments might look like hiring a person who oversees records management responsibilities, completing a comprehensive inventory and data mapping process, identifying your organization's most critical and high value records, and ensuring that you have systems and controls in place to mitigate risks to them, acquiring technology that automates how long records need to be kept, adhering to comprehensive record policies through routine staff training, or conducting routine compliance checks to ensure adherence to policies and plans. So with that said, most government entities do not have advanced RIM, and we don't really expect that of you either. So good RIM doesn't require a lot of resources. Most agencies do not have enough staff or time to invest in records and information management, but there are ways to apply records management principles with whatever time and resources are available to you. So just do your best with wherever you find yourself and with whatever resources you have. Records management will look different from agency to agency. Every government agency will have its own unique needs and situations. Just remember that RIM does not have to be rocket science. It's just keeping your records and knowing how long to keep them. We recommend keeping it as simple as possible to support your already basic record keeping requirements, and it's likely that your agency is already doing more RIM than you know. Unit 2 is getting to know our records because we cannot manage our records unless we know what they are. We make records because they help us do our jobs. They provide evidence that we agreed to take action or that we provided a service. They document our processes, educate us about procedures, or show us data about our accomplishments that we can consult and review over time. Half the battle of records management is figuring out what records our departments make and why. The first step in records management is taking the time to get to know your records. In general, a record is defined as any recorded information, regardless of medium or characteristics, made or received and retained by an organization in pursuit of legal obligations or in the transaction of business. But in Utah, the law defines what's a government record, which as a result affects what rules do and do not apply to things considered to be a government record. So according to the law, a record means a book, letter, document, paper, map, plan, photograph, film, card, tape, recording, electronic data, or other documentary material, regardless of physical form or characteristics, that is prepared, owned, received, or retained by a government entity or political subdivision, and where all the information in the original is reproducible by photocopy or other mechanical or electronic means. Additionally, according to Utah code, anything that is considered a government record must be identified and its retention needs defined. Knowing what is and isn't a government record will help you make determinations about how long things need to be kept and rules about what can and cannot be accessed. So GRAMA does list many items that are not considered government records according to the law, even if they sometimes meet the definition of one. Familiarizing yourself with Utah code will help you know if any of the exceptions apply to your records. You should make note of any citations in the code that apply to you so you can quickly reference them. Some common examples of non-records according to Utah code include personal emails, temporary drafts created for personal use, calendars, copyrighted books, and computer programs. This is not an exhaustive list, so take the time to know what might apply to your unique situation. Because the law is somewhat specific about what is and isn't a government record, it can help to know what you are managing, because sometimes non-government records have a way of showing up in our offices. So let's take a look at this record. Based on how Utah code defines a record, is this a government record? So this is from the Assistant Director of the Archives, letting everyone know that there are bagels in the break room. This actually is a record because emails sent from government accounts regarding government business, even if seemingly frivolous, are considered government records. Next, we have the Salesforce use policy, and this is considered a record because policy are government records. And this is a trickier one, a draft of the Salesforce use policy. Draft versions of policies and other records still in the draft stage are not considered records unless you have begun to publicly disperse the policies and expect people to act on its contents. Then it loses its draft status and becomes a record. You can't manage your records unless you know what they are. Now that we know what is and isn't a record, we can talk about the next steps to help you get to know your records better. Sometimes the best way to know what you have is to make a list. Conducting an inventory is a great way to find out exactly what records your government creates. The process can help you identify their uses and make plans for what to do with them. Inventorying requires going through your physical and electronic records and listing what you have. An inventory can look a lot of different ways, whether it is on paper, in a Word document, or kept in a spreadsheet or a database. Things to include on your inventory could be the date of the records that were created, type of record, title or name, author or creator, the office of record, which is the department responsible for maintaining the record, and the version. Since we know from our definition of a record that they can be reproduced, it's easy for multiple versions of a record to exist. When it comes time to delete things, you will want to make sure that you have accounted for all the versions, or at least who might be maintaining them. Having a plan about how you are going to keep track of your inventory and how you and your staff will use it before you start your project is a good idea. Making sure everyone is on the same page is important. An inventory is a lot of work, so doing it right the first time will make sure you get the most out of your efforts. Here is an example of a simple inventory from the archives for electronic files we are keeping in our shared drive. Local entities who create their own retention schedules or policies have to file them with us, which means that we have to keep track of those records. Here is an inventory of them. We decided on the information that was important for us to collect, like type of entity, date submitted, date approved, and the subject of the record. This inventory reflects information we need because of our mandate to keep those records to document compliance with the law. An important note is don't forget to inventory all formats of your records, both paper and electronic. Records management compliance applies to records regardless of their physical characteristics. Utah's Uniform Electronic Transaction Act states that you can keep a record in an electronic format. Your agency can determine which format works best for you. As long as the information in the records is the same as it was in the paper format, and you have the ability to keep the records accessible, you may find that an electronic record suits your agency's needs. Just be ready to migrate records to the newest electronic format. Electronic record formats and files types can quickly become obsolete and make records unreadable and inaccessible. So don't store all of your electronic documents on floppy disks. Another way to get to know your records is to take some time to understand how they might be grouped together. Records organized into groups are called record series. A record series is a group of records that are related in a logical way. They may document a particular transaction, function, or subject, and should share a relationship based on how or why they are created or how they get used and maintained over time. Any records kept together in an identified record series should have a need to be retained for the same amount of time and destroyed together when that time expires. There are many different ways to identify a record series and group records. Using an analogy of bread, we could categorize bread as one series, bread, or as many series, maybe based on type, wheat, white, rolls, bagels, or as two series, one for fresh bread and one for stale bread. And here's a real-world example of contracts. We might organize contracts as one record series, as long as they could all be deleted or destroyed according to the same rules, or you may choose to create multiple series for different kinds of contracts, like simple fixed price incentive or one for active contracts and one for expired contracts. Your decision to group records might be based on the volume and variety of contracts that you manage and the care that they need. For example, if you don't have a large variety of contracts, you might only want to distinguish between expired and active. Or if you have a large volume of contracts to manage annually, you might want to divide them by contract type for ease of use. Once you have identified your record series, you can organize them in whatever way makes the most sense for your records. Things that you might want to determine, here's the things you might consider when determining how to organize the records. Ease of access. Are people thinking about project numbers when they refer to a record, or are they referencing people or company names? Also think about the security of the records. Can some records only be accessed by authorized personnel? Make sure records that need frequent access by everyone aren't organized within records that need to stay secure. And lastly, actionable dates. Do some records have certain actions that have to occur at agreed upon dates and times? Utilize folders and subfolders for storage and for access control, and ensure that at least 2 people have access at any time to ensure continuity of business operations. And also document your choices. Keep them with the inventory you conducted, and you are on your way to building policies and procedures for your records management program. A big part of records management is knowing how long to keep a record. The short answer is as long as it's useful, but how do we know how long we need to keep something? In this unit, we will cover how we utilize records appraisal tools to help us determine the usefulness value of our records. This is the records and information lifecycle, which records management professionals use to break down the stages of records management. First, we create or capture records. For example, capturing might be converting information into data in a record-keeping or business system. Second, we use the records we have created or captured for our varied business processes and collaborate with our colleagues to change or enhance them. Third, we make considerations for the various versions that now might exist because of the nature of sharing and collaborating. Fourth, we consider how we need to access the records, whether that is for business purposes, legal discovery, or in the case of government grant requests. We make considerations for storage of the records by identifying how long they need to be kept based on our various needs for the records. And finally, we destroy the records that we no longer have a use for, or we send records that have a permanent or historic need to a place where they can be adequately preserved. For our purposes, we are going to break out the retention and storage phase to explore in more detail the processes for determining how long to keep the records. Within the scope of this phase, you would make considerations for how long you need to keep something based on its use to your agency and reflective of statutory regulations, and the environment or system you need to retain it in for the period of time it is designated to ensure that you have access to the records for as long as you are required to have them. The process of figuring out the value of records is called appraisal. Appraisal is often associated with monetary assessment, but in this case, a records appraisal is assessing the usefulness value of the information contained in the records to our business practices and/or statutory requirements. Records can be valuable in different ways. They can be administratively valuable for as long as they are needed to carry out the functions of the government entity. They can be fiscally valuable if they are needed to document the expenditure of public funds and to fulfill government financial obligations. They can be legally valuable if they are needed to provide evidence of the legal rights or obligations of the government or its citizens, or to ensure compliance with laws and regulations. And they can be historically valuable if they contain information that documents the history of government or the community. Records with historical value become part of the historical record of the state after their administrative, fiscal, or legal purposes have been served. Using our earlier example of contract records, here is how this one record type might be appraised differently by the various people involved in its use. So, for a contract, the purchasing team, which is the record creator, is in charge of negotiating a contract with a vendor. The team draws up a contract for a needed service, thus creating our record. The purchasing team has a need to use the record only until the service is provided, and then they have little administrative need for the record. Let's say it takes 1 year for our vendor to execute the service. Then the legal team, after creating the contract, our purchasing team passes the record to the legal team to review it for terms and conditions and to ensure it complies with the law. The legal team wants to keep the contract to ensure that they have it to review in case the contracted service isn't done correctly and they need to negotiate or sue. Let's say the statute of limitations is 7 years for this service. So our legal team wants the contract around for that entire period of time. Lastly, our contract gets passed along to the finance team for review as evidence of how much to pay the service provider. They want to keep the contract around for 4 years in case they are audited and need to provide proof of why they paid the service provider. Despite its various uses, we keep the record for 7 years to meet its longest need. In this case, it's the legal need. After we determine how long to keep a record, we want to write that decision down in an official policy. A collection of these retention rules is called a records retention schedule. The State Archives manages a general records retention schedule that provides an array of legally approved retention schedules that governments can apply to their records. But agencies may also have specified retention schedules for records not represented in the general retention schedule. We will get into the more various types of retention schedules a little later, but for now you can see that this is what a general retention schedule looks like. You can see the retention and disposition noted below that represents the records use appraisal that we previously discussed. One of the most important tools for taking care of records is the retention schedule, often called disposition authority. Imagine what a grocery store would look like and smell like if they rarely got rid of food that hadn't been purchased or used, or if there were no sell-by or use-by dates. In short, retention schedules provide us with our use-by date. All government records must have a legally approved retention schedule assigned to them to provide disposition authority. Identifying your government record series through an inventory process and assigning them an approved retention schedule will ensure that you are in compliance with this mandate. The State Archives provides options for finding or getting a legally approved retention schedule for your records, including the Records Management Committee, which is a public board appointed by the governor's office that has the responsibility to review and approve schedules for the retention and disposal of records generated by both state and local government entities. The Records Management Committee reviews and approves the general retention schedules. The State Archives has the responsibility to keep as outlined in the law. This tool can assist agencies to quickly identify pre-approved disposition authorizations for commonly created government records. If you have not identified the retention schedules your government records are following, it is assumed that they are subject to the general retention schedule. Once a general records retention is approved, it is considered active and supersedes all previous versions of that schedule. The archives will send out draft schedules to appointed records officers prior to the review and approval by the RMC. So make sure that your records officer contact info is up to date so that you're in the know about new and updated schedules. If the general records retention schedule doesn't have a sufficient retention period to suit your disposition needs, you have options for creating one that is unique to the record series you have identified. You can create a record series specific retention schedule approved through the Records Management Committee, or if you're a political subdivision of the state, you could have your governing body review and approve a record series retention plan for your entity. If you're interested in learning more about either option, the Records and Information Management Specialist would be happy to talk with you about this approval process. Inevitably, at the end of your records retention period, you will need to make considerations for what you do with your records. This is the disposition phase. Records have one of two dispositions, either destroy or transfer to the state archives where they can be preserved permanently. So here's some tips on how to manage destruction. Establish a routine for destroying records as part of your normal course of business. Be clear about who is responsible for the destruction of each copy of the record and how and when the records will be destroyed. Document the disposal of records, citing the retention schedule, which authorized disposal, the date, and the names of the person who's disposed of records. A destruction log can prove invaluable if your records become part of an audit or litigation, but also simplify the process of responding to grammar requests by clarifying whether or not you possess the requested record. The log can also prove useful for agency staff looking for a record as well. And we have templates for destruction logs online. Just be aware that routine destruction should be delayed if you know that records will be part of an ongoing or anticipated litigation, pending grammar appeals, or are being used in an audit. If your record has been appraised as having historic value or has a permanent retention, the disposition of your records is transferred to an archive, meaning it doesn't get destroyed after it has satisfied all of its business uses. You will need to make decisions about how you want to archive and provide perpetual care for that record. The state archives can work with government agencies to take on custody of records that have historic value and take responsibility for their permanent preservation and access. If you are keeping records of permanent value in your office, you will need to take additional steps to ensure that they are kept in storage conditions that provide the best chances for the record's continued access and survival over time. Here is our last unit, how we can help you. The Records and Information Management Specialists at the State Archives are available to help you explore any of the topics discussed in today's training and provide additional resources or consultation. But here's a few resources we provide that you might find useful as you explore or as you oversee or build your agency's work program. First up is our website. This is the Records and Information Management page on our website. From here, you can access the Records Officer Hub, find instructions on transferring records, find authorized retention schedules, and more. Here is the Records Officer Hub, and it provides access to various records-related applications, like the Open Records portal and the Public Notice website. You can also update your agency's record officer assignments, update Public Notice website posters, and update agency or public body information. This is also where you will link to take the certification test or look at your previous certification data. There's also lots of information located here about how to utilize all the tools available on this page. It's recommended that you explore all of the available instructions before diving in. A popular service that is provided by the State Archives is our off-site storage facility, known as the State Record Center in Clearfield. This record storage facility is for paper records that have not yet met their retention. Records stored here remain in the legal custody of the originating agency, which means that you would still be responsible for providing access to the records if requested by following the process to have them recalled to your office through mail or scan on demand. This site is not an archival facility, so it isn't climate controlled, but it can help you save a lot of space in your own office. Storing records here is free. There's no monthly charge, but you do need to purchase and use approved State Archives boxes, receive an assigned series number from your Records and Information Management Specialist, and secure transport or delivery to the facility. Contact your room specialist if you are interested in using the service, and they can review with you the steps for being prepared to store offsite. For records with permanent historic value, you can transfer them into the custody of the State Archives for permanent preservation. Our facility in Salt Lake City is designed for long-term storage of records by providing climate-controlled conditions, in addition to trained staff that can assess and process the records for additional care or access needs. Archivists on staff will provide access to publicly accessible records via our research room to ensure access is controlled and secure. And thank you for joining us today for RIM 101. If you want to learn more about any of the topics we covered today or explore more of the resources we have, please don't hesitate to reach out.